Islam, like its other two Abrahamic predecessors, Judaism and Christianity, contains a lot of prophecies about the end of times. You know, the Judgment Day stuff, about how the world is going to end, what important events are going to take place before it ends, and other stuff like that. Two of the biggest prophecies in Islam, among a plethora of prophecies, are the coming of the Christ and Antichrist, which are incidentally shared by both Christianity and Islam. Well, in Christianity it is a bit different and we can discuss it at some other time. But as far as Islam is concerned, ask any Muslim and you will find out that these are two of the biggest prophecies the entire Muslim Ummah is waiting for to be fulfilled, anxiously. The prophecies contained in the secondary source of Islam, known as the Hadith. Since Hadith are the sayings attributed to the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that in their present form available with us, were recorded a few generations after the passing of the Holy Prophet. They almost always contain a chain of narrations and a chain of narrators spanning multiple generations, and therefore each saying comes in multiple versions with some variations in words. Scholars have done a great job of separating the authentic and inauthentic narrations among them. Hence, I'll only be quoting the authentic and generally the most basic forms of narrations containing the subject matter, and leave the variations and extended versions for another time. The broad strokes of the prophecies shall be clear and complete from these basic narrations nonetheless. So let's consider the defining characteristics of the Christ and Antichrist in the following narrations. You can pause and read the whole narration, but I shall only read the relevant parts so that we can build a picture. The Prophet mentioned, "While sleeping near the Kaaba last night, I saw in my dream a man of brown color, the best one can see amongst brown color, and his hair was long that it fell between his shoulders. His hair was lank and water was dribbling from his head, and he was placing his hands on the shoulders of two men while circumambulating the Kaaba. I asked, 'Who is this?' They replied, 'This is Jesus, son of Mary. May Allah be pleased with him. Behind him I saw a man who had very curly hair and was blind in the right eye. He was placing his hand on the shoulders of a person while performing tawaf around the Kaaba. I asked, 'Who is this?' They replied, 'Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, i.e. the Antichrist. I know what the Antichrist will have with him. He will have two flowing rivers, one that appears to the eye to be clear water, and one that appears to the eye to be flaming fire. If anyone sees that, let him go to the river which he thinks is fire, and close his eyes, then lower his head and drink from it, for it is cool water. The Antichrist has one blind eye with a layer of thick skin over it, and between his eyes is written disbeliever, which every believer will read, whether he is literate or illiterate.' We asked, 'How long will he remain on the earth?' The Prophet replied, 40 days, one like a year, one like a month, one like a week, and rest of his days like yours. Then Jesus, son of Mary, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, will descend at the white minaret to the east of Damascus. He will then catch him up at the gate of Lod and kill him. Jesus, son of Mary, peace be upon him, would then descend, and leader of the Muslims would invite him to come and lead them in prayer. But he would say, 'No, some amongst you are leaders over some amongst you.' And Muslims would be conquerors of Constantinople, and as they would be busy in distributing the spoils of war amongst themselves, after hanging their swords by the olive trees, the Satan would cry, 'The Antichrist has taken your place among your family.' They would then come out, but it would be of no avail. And when they would come to Syria, he would come out while they would be still preparing themselves for battle, drawing up the ranks. Certainly the time of prayer shall come, and then Jesus, peace be upon him, son of Mary, would descend and would lead them. When the enemy of Allah would see him, it would dissolve just as the salt dissolves itself in water, and if Jesus were not to confront him at all, even then it would dissolve completely. But Allah would kill him by his hand, and he would show him his blood on his lance. By him in whose hand is my life, the Son of Mary will soon descend among you as a just judge. He will break the cross, kill the swine, abolish the religious tax, and the wealth will pour forth to such an extent that no one will accept it. You will attack Arabia and Allah will enable you to conquer it. Then you would attack Persia and He would make you to conquer it. Then you would attack Rome and Allah will enable you to conquer it. Then you would attack the Antichrist and Allah will enable you to conquer him. The Antichrist will come from the eastern side with the intention of attacking Medina. Then the angels will turn his face towards Syria and there he will perish. So the salient characteristics of the Antichrist as per the Hadith include blind in the right eye, having disbeliever written between his eyes that every literate and illiterate believer shall read, will have rivers of fire and water wherein fire will actually be water and water fire, will stay on the earth for 40 days where one day is equal to a year, one day like a month, one day like a week, and the rest of the days like other days. He will come from the east to invade Medina but will be turned towards Syria, will be chased by Jesus, peace be upon him, will keep melting like salt in water and will be destined to completely melt away all on his own, but Allah will want him to be killed by Jesus, peace be upon him. Similarly, the salient characteristics of the Christ, peace be upon him, as per the Hadith include will descend soon after the Antichrist in Syria, where Muslims will ask him to lead the prayer, but he will decline, saying, "Your leaders will be from among yourselves." Will chase and kill the Antichrist and show his blood on his spear. Will be a just judge, will break the cross, will kill the swine, will abolish religious tax, and wealth will pour forth to such an extent that no one will accept it. And all this will happen after Muslims have conquered Arabia, then Persia, then Rome, and finally Constantinople. So for the longest time and to date, the traditional understanding of Muslim scholars has been that these will be actual persons, that Jesus Christ will in the flesh descend from heaven and actually kill the powerful Antichrist in a mano a mano fight. They even have a series of events lined up for this fight, which includes the coming of the Mahdi, a promised Muslim ruler and deliverer who shall be a precursor to the Christ. And that is why the Muslims today are anxiously waiting and praying for the Mahdi, because that would mean that the Christ will follow shortly after. I have a separate video on the Mahdi just in case you want to know more about him and how we Muslims bungled up that interpretation also. But what if this wasn't the case? That these prophecies about the Christ and the Antichrist weren't literal but rather symbolic. Let me explain. You see, prophecies are mostly shown as visions to the prophets in both the Quran and the Bible, and visions are often symbolic. In the Quran, we come across visions that are symbolic in the story of the Prophet Joseph, peace be upon him, who is called Yusuf in Islam, which is almost similar to the biblical one. He is shown stars and the sun and the moon, which aren't actually celestial objects. He interprets cows eating cows, not literally, but symbolically. On the other hand, in the Bible, such kinds of visions are aplenty, containing horsemen that do not stand for horsemen, beasts that do not stand for beasts, dragons that do not mean dragons, waters that don't represent water, and many other characters, objects, and events that are only ever meant to be interpreted as symbols and allegories. And in some of the hadiths that we read today, Muhammad, peace be upon him, even explicitly mentions that what he saw was in a dream. So let's assume for the sake of argument that these prophecies were symbolic. Then the question becomes, what was the reality that they were symbolizing? Well, normally it would be hard to say, but because of the number of details provided in the narrations and by the virtue of the era we are living in, the answer has actually become quite obvious. Let's do this unraveling in the same sequence we did the characteristics in, and take the Antichrist first. So the Antichrist was a symbol for communism, with the Soviet Union or USSR as its embodiment. Let's go through each of the characteristics once again to see this for ourselves. One eye blind or blind in the right eye signified the incomplete and defective nature of communism as an ideology, promising to be a panacea for all the world's ills, but actually producing nothing but harm. The defective ideology was based on a partial view of reality, as if the person making the observation had only one eye and was not able to factor in all the necessary facts. The specification of the right eye being blind, in addition, could also be a hint for lacking divine knowledge, which communism ardently loathed, as right is signified with good and left with bad in many religions, especially the Abrahamic religions. Having disbeliever written between his eyes that every literate and illiterate believer shall read, was clearly a reference to communism's open and self-avowed atheism, which even took on brutal manifestations. Scientific atheism was the declared religion of the Soviet Union and almost all other communist states. Will have rivers of fire and water, wherein fire will actually be water and water fire, represents the opposite nature of communism's claims. The solutions it provided to bring about good in this world were actually evil for human society, and the practices it abhorred and declared as evil were actually beneficial for the society. Will stay on the earth for 40 days, where one day is equal to a year, one day like a month, one day like a week, and the rest of the days like other days. Spelt out the exact duration of communism's, i.e., USSR's, stay in this world. The prophecy mentions 40 days, where it says that these are not days but years, out of which one day will be equal to a week, i.e., 7 years, and one day to a month, i.e., 29 or 30 years, leaving 38 years towards the end. Hence, 7 years of Lenin's rule, 1917 to 1924, followed by 29 years of Stalin's rule, 1924 to 1953, followed by 38 years of USSR's remaining lifetime, 1953 to 1991, i.e., dissolution of the Soviet Union. He will come from the east to invade Medina, but will be turned towards Syria. Symbolize the paltry success communism found in Islamic nations as opposed to Christian nations. Because remember that in the Holy Prophet's time, Syria was a bastion of Christianity, and the direction east is an obvious allusion towards communism coming forth from the east, which it did. Will be chased by Jesus, peace be upon him, symbolically represented Christianity manifesting in a state that became the arch enemy of USSR and chased its influence across the globe. I know it is already clear which state I am talking about, but let me just get through these characteristics of the Antichrist first, and then I'll pronounce it. Will keep melting like salt in water and will be destined to completely melt away all on his own, but Allah will want him to be killed by Jesus, peace be upon him. Clearly signifies the non-abiding nature of communism, because it was a defective and a bad remedy. And thus, the prophecy underlines that if left to its own devices, communism would still be destined to fail and melt away on its own. Yet God will want it to be killed by Jesus. Now let's go over the characteristics of Christ, peace be upon him, with the Christ obviously symbolizing Christianity and manifested in the arrival of the United States of America in the First and the Second World Wars. Will descend soon after the Antichrist in Syria, where Muslims will ask him to lead the prayer, but he will decline, saying, "Your leaders will be from among yourselves." Is the symbolized depiction of USA metaphorically descending in World War I and II and insisting and ensuring that all Muslim lands acquired by European powers after the fall of the Ottoman Empire are returned to the Muslims and given their independence. Will chase and kill the Antichrist and show his blood on his spear, is symbolic of the way USA countered communism and the USSR to the ends of the earth, giving her a bloody nose with the help of Afghan Muslims, finally bringing about its dissolution in 1991. Will be a just judge, signifies the new world order that USA brokered and implemented with the help of other world powers, from which League of Nations and then United Nations also came forth, with autonomy and independence for each nation, even the defeated ones. This is signified as a just rule. Will break the cross, represents the end USA put to Christian imperialism and colonization and to seeing the world as Christian and non-Christian. Will kill the swine, again represents the breaking apart of the Soviet Union because the prophecies containing this detail are mutually exclusive of the prophecies containing the details about the Antichrist. Its depiction as a pig or swine, though, is a play on the Muslim and biblical status of the swine, wherein it looks like a kosher and halal animal but is actually forbidden to eat, symbolizing the ostensibly apparent goodness of communism, actually hiding its harmful nature. Will abolish religious tax, particularly the jizya, which is an Islamic tax levied on non-Muslims, but generally could represent any discriminatory laws against any religions other than the state religion. The post-World War II era brought about secular governments that outlawed religious discriminations of all sorts and all religions, thereby ushering in an era of human equality and dignity irrespective of religions, languages, or ethnicities. Wealth will pour forth to such an extent that no one will accept it. Describes the unprecedented good times and affluence after the world wars that continues to this day. And all this will happen after Muslims have conquered Arabia, then Persia, then Rome, and finally Constantinople. And this sequence was followed exactly. Muslims first conquered Arabia, then Persian Empire, then defeated Rome and sequestered it to merely Anatolia, and finally in 1453 conquered Constantinople as well. Communism, aka the Antichrist, came forth in exactly this sequence. So there you have it. Two of the biggest prophecies of Islam were fulfilled in the USA and USSR exactly as foretold and like clockwork. If you are good at symbolic interpretations, or if you're familiar with the biblical prophecies of Daniel, Ezekiel, and the book of Revelation, etc., you can easily attest to the fact that these prophecies and their fulfillment fit like hand in glove. USA was the prophesied Messiah and USSR the Antichrist, and our scholars failed to recognize it while it was happening and even today. But hopefully, I've laid it bare enough for them to recognize now. But what does this mean and entail for Muslims now? Does this mean that we should accept USA as the second coming of the Messiah and follow its commands hook, line, and sinker from here on out? Why is USA symbolized as Jesus versus Antichrist as communism in the first place, and not just simply as an angel or a good person versus a devil or a bad person? I mean, why this specific iconography? For these questions and others like it, subscribe and follow this channel. And if you have any questions and want to have a back and forth with me, please subscribe to my Patreon with link in the description below. I'll either reply to your questions there and then or include them in my Deep Takes podcast if I find them beneficial for my wider audience. I have also highlighted and explained the fulfillment of 14 big prophecies in Islam. You can find it here. The video is currently in Urdu, but soon I'll replace it with an English one. So keep following for updates. And please share it with your respective scholars and imams so that they can also recognize this, or at least they can offer a good critique, because it won't be an easy pill to swallow for the Muslims. And also, I would love your comments.